Delaware has till March 17, 2015 to submit a plan on how it will comply with a new rule that allows more people with disabilities to choose community living over institutional settings. To help Delawareans gain a better understanding of the rule from the U.S. Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CDS convened the nation's first CMS town hall of educators, advocates, providers, and officials. They learned how funding will flow increasingly to what the new rule defines as home and community-based services and away from settings that isolate people from community life.
We've gathered to talk about a new rule from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS. For me, it represents a real turning point in our country's pursuit of authentic integration of people with disabilities into our communities. The release of the final CMS rule was a defining moment in more ways than one. Very literally, the rule defines what it means for a service or support to qualify as home and community-based. But in a much larger sense, it's saying that the federal government and states will now put their money where their mouths are. Funding will no longer be in conflict with intent. The new CMS rule is about as powerful a policy as they get. It acknowledges the central importance of an individual's right to make choices about where and how they live and work, and it makes it possible for Medicaid funding to be directed in support of those choices.
And I appreciated Beth Minio's terminology, authentic community integration, in her opening comments. To me, that's what we're trying to get to. What does authentic community integration looks like, and how can we make sure the money that we're spending is supporting a goal of authentic community integration?
What CMS tried to do was set out the same standards for what's home and community-based settings for different Medicaid authorities that all rely on home and community-based settings. So both for Medicaid waivers and for Medicaid state plan options, they all are supposed to be subject essentially to the same rules about what does home and community-based mean. In one of these overview documents, CMS says something like, we created this rule because we had all these different settings that had been now being used to serve people as home and community-based settings or to deliver home and community-based services. And so we thought it was time to give some guidance about, what counts as home and community-based settings. There's a lot of focus on sort of looking more carefully at what we consider home and community-based settings so that we're not just replicating institutions and, as we say, trans-institutionalizing people from one setting to another, like from a hospital into a large boarding care home. They set out a series of requirements for what a setting needs to look like to be home and community-based. They also gave us a list of settings that are not home and community-based services. And then they gave us a list of settings that are presumed not to be home and community-based settings, but they might be. And so there's a process of heightened scrutiny that the HHS will use to decide if, in fact, even though they look like this, that they, in fact, have the qualities of home and community-based settings and they don't have the qualities of an institution. So those are basically the things the rule does. And then it also sets out some requirements for a person-centered planning process, which really didn't happen before as a condition of getting home and community-based services funding. So they require certain things, and I'll talk a little bit about that. They also gave states a transition period to try to comply if they have existing waivers or state plan options or things that they're changing. And they've already had things in place, and now things are going to have to look pretty different in a lot of states from how they currently look. And so, CMS wanted to be flexible and said, well, we recognize that you're going to have to do a lot of things to change what your service system looks like. And so I'll go through briefly the criteria for what is home and community-based. So one thing is the setting must be in the greater community and integrated in the greater community and support full access to the community, including opportunities to seek employment, and particularly employment in competitive integrated settings, opportunities to engage in community life, opportunities to control one's personal resources, opportunities to receive services in the community. So the setting has to be chosen by the person from among other options, including non-disability specific settings, and also including a private unit in a residential setting. This, I think, is actually one of the most important pieces of the reg. And so to me, this says everybody who's in an HCBS setting, a home and community-based setting, who's getting funded by Medicaid to be to get home and community-based services in that setting, they have to have been given a choice of living in a non-disability specific setting, which to me means mainstream housing. It's not a setting where everybody has a disability. It's like your own home or apartment, and maybe it's supported housing or your own housing with services. So that's not how things function in the world right now. For the most part, that would be a very big change. And so even if you choose not to live in that type of setting and you choose to live somewhere else, you have to have been given that option. So that's a very, very important piece. And then CMS also says you have to have privacy, dignity, respect, freedom from coercion and restraint. The setting has to optimize autonomy and independence in making life choices, including in daily activities. This person-centered plan, by the way, also has to actually document that you have been given opportunities to live in other settings, including this non-disability specific setting and the setting with a private unit. So that is important as well. And then finally, the setting's supposed to facilitate choice about what services the person gets and who provides those services. And for settings that are controlled by providers, there are a bunch of additional requirements, and those are basically the person has essentially the rights of an ordinary tenant. It seems like most large congregate settings are not going to fall under, are not going to meet these requirements because by their nature, they tend to have these kinds of restrictions. You don't have choice of roommates. You don't have choice to furnish your own unit. You don't have control over your own schedule. You don't have access to food at any time, et cetera. Those are the criteria for what is home and community-based. Now, what is not home and community-based? CMS lists several settings that are just not home and community-based ever. So a nursing home, an IMD, an institution for mental diseases, which it has a complicated definition, but essentially it's a large place that tends to serve primarily people with psychiatric disabilities. Could be a hospital, could be a nursing home, could be a boarding care home, any number of things that it's over 16 beds, and it primarily serves people with mental illness. An ICF, intermediate care facility for people with intellectual disabilities, and a hospital. Those things are just not home and community-based settings. And then finally, there are settings that are presumed not to be home and community-based, but there's this heightened scrutiny process. So if a state wanted to say these are home and community-based, we think that they are in the way that they're being run in our state, then the HHS will take a look at them and will apply this heightened scrutiny process. And those settings are three kinds of settings. One is it's in a building that provides inpatient institutional treatment. So this used to be like the floor of the hospital that is supposedly the community-based unit where people have transitioned out of the hospital, but they're still like literally in the building. The second one is a setting that is in a building on the grounds of or immediately adjacent to a public institution. And the third one is any other setting that has the effect of isolating people from the broader community. And it is important that as we are moving as a country in the direction of the most integrated setting and making opportunities available to people to live in the most integrated setting, to work in the most integrated setting, that these CMS rules, which determine where the money goes, are very important in driving that process and bringing service systems along to be able to promote the most integrated setting and to offer it to many more people.
I'm hoping that this is the first of many events like this around the country where people really try to understand the rule and then think about where are the opportunities for you at the state level and the local level to use this rule to move policy in a direction that you think will improve the quality of lives of people with disabilities in your community.
I'm wondering whether you're aware of whether states are engaging stakeholders as they develop their transition plans.
I think it's the intent of CMS that they do, and I think states understand generally it's not a good way to make policy if you're not involving stakeholders. But the bottom line is everybody in this room who is not a state official is a stakeholder, and you can make sure that your states are including you whether they want to or not. So I just encourage folks to take it upon themselves to make sure that's happening. The most important point I can make to you is this is a new rule. It's happening in a broader context. You all can help define what this rule means in Delaware, Pennsylvania, and other states. There's a natural transition planning process that's built into the rule, and there's lots of specifics under the rule that are still to be worked out. So I think it's important if you all see a red flag or a problem for you to be continuing to raise that. This is not, the final rule was not your last chance to raise these issues. Continue to flag how to make this work in a way that's not going to have unintended consequences. And from my perspective, I think the fact that you have this turnout today is a sign in terms of people see this as being meaningful. And to me, that's the ultimate goal of public policy. When the administration defines community, we want to define it in a way that's going to be meaningful in the lives of people with disabilities. So
What does the new rule mean to the population that you represent?
To me, it means people matter. Just in a nutshell, that people matter and they deserve. They deserve to live in the community. They deserve to have employment. They deserve to be part of the community.
And from the perspective of all-inclusiveness, which is certainly the ultimate goal, I think, of the new rule, what better way to be all-inclusive than to have people not only living in the community, but actually contributing to the community through employment opportunity.
Individuals with disabilities should be integrated as part of the community, and this rule helps give people the opportunity to make that happen. It's not just window dressing that people are out in the community, but that they're really getting high quality, great support programs that enable them to make the choices that they want for their lives.
These rules mean a lot, as long as the scrutiny that they talk about really makes it so that people are living in an integrated place and not continue to be segregated. If it gets better in that vein and people are truly integrated into the community, then we'll get just a little more used to it, and it'll be commonplace, and disability won't be something that your neighbors are going to fear. It'll just be a part of life, and will be a part of life.